Hi there. Welcome to the Sober Circle channel. Enjoy this speaker tape.
Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Don, and I am an alcoholic. The Morrhead Mafia. And I'm sober tonight by the living grace of God and the miracle of Alcoholics Anonymous. Now we're talking about drug addicts and alcoholics and whatnot here. And I've noticed that in the paper, the mayor of Washington, Mayor Barry, has decided not to run for re-election as mayor because he figures all his sex charges and drug charges, he'd make much better chance of running for Congress. So I also think it's interesting to note that our government has arranged with South America to extradite some of those drug lords. They can come to this country and be stripped of their wealth by defense attorneys. So I'm supposed to start off, I guess, with a story, a drinking story, and I only know one drinking story. It's the only one I've ever known. And this is a story about a young playboy who one day met a young woman down at the bar of the hotel. And things got going, and he got very interested, and so he invited her up to his room for a drink. When he got her up there, she came into the room. She was well-groomed, chic, and seemingly quite intellectual. So he asked her if she would care for a drop of port or sherry wine. "Why, sherry, by all means," she replied, "because sherry to me is the nectar of all gods. Just looking at it here in its crystal clear decanter fills me with the anticipation of a heavenly thrill. And when the stopper is removed and the gorgeous liquid is poured into a glass, I inhale the delicious tangy fumes, and I am lifted on the wings of ecstasy. It seems I taste its magic potion, and my whole being seems to glow. 1,000 violins throb in my ears, and I am sent into another world. On the other hand," she said, "port makes me fart." That's it for drinking stories. The Alateen book describes alcoholism so well, I believe, because in the Alateen book they say that many of the symptoms of alcoholism are in the behavior of the alcoholic. And when we understand that, realize that, we can look back in history and we can pick alcoholics out all over the place. And of course my favorite one is from 496 years ago, Christopher Columbus. Now, I didn't know Chris personally, although some may wonder because of my age, but some of the young ones think I'm that old. But when you just look back at his story, you just know he had to be an alcoholic. And the reason I say that, when he left home, he had no earthly idea of where he was going. When he got to this country, he didn't know where he was. When he got back home, he didn't know where he'd been. But to top it off, some woman paid for the whole shot. Now, I don't know about any of the rest of you, but that sounds remarkably like my drinking story. And I'm not going to get into a drunkalog tonight because I think you will agree that a person couldn't be up here at Thief River Falls on a Saturday night and with a whole bunch of drunks by mistake. I'm here legitimately. I can recall my first AA meeting. I'm not going to get into my drinking story. I was raised in an alcoholic home. My father was an alcoholic and my older brother. And I know that I felt different as a very, very early in life as a child. And I was finessed into going to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous back in February of 1948. And I didn't want to go, of course. I was very vehement about it. I didn't want to be called an alcoholic or anything else. But I got finessed into going, and I said I would go to this one meeting for no other reason, of course, to get all these people off my back. And on my way to that meeting, I just knew that it wouldn't work for me anyway, this AA, because, you see, I was different. I knew that. All my life I had been different. My problem is I was such a sensitive person, and nobody had ever understood me my whole life. My family never understood me. My teachers never understood me. And by golly, if you had problems like that, you'd have a drink once in a while, or so I thought. But anyway, I wound up at this meeting in a small town up in northern Ontario in Canada, and there's 4 fellows there. And they started talking to me, and I just knew that it wasn't going to work, but I had to put this time in. And they started talking, and as they started talking, it dawned on me right away. Now I know how people get members in this organization. They phoned her. She's told them all about me. Now they're saying they did those things just to suck me into this thing. And I said, boy, when I get home, I'll really straighten her out. Until they got into that part of my drinking that she didn't know anything about. Now I know she didn't. Otherwise she'd have left long ago. And I got suspicious, and I asked these guys, how come they know so much about me? And they said, we're not talking about you, Don. This is just a projection of the basic symptoms of alcoholism. And I said, well, I've done all those things, and I'm not an alcoholic. And they just looked at each other and smiled and kept right on going like I didn't exist. And back in those days, in 1948, AA was relatively new. It was about 12 and a half years old, and they were desperate for members. And a meeting in those days lasted as long as it took them to convince that newcomer to come back to the next meeting. And as I say, I'd gone there for that 1 hour and arrived there at 8:30 and didn't get home till 2:30 in the morning. But I did say I would go back to the next meeting. And of course, I've been going ever since. And I look back at some of these things and realize how fortunate I was that I kept going. I was only 26 years of age at the time, and of course my problem is I had had a perception problem all my life. I never listened to what people said. I always interpreted what they said. If I came home from school and waved a piece of paper, my father says, guess what happened in school today? And he put his hand on my shoulder, he'd say, Donald, how many times have we told you don't drop your bicycle out in the sidewalk where people are walking by? Put it in the rack we made for it. And please close the screen door. The flies are coming in. How often do we have to tell you? Now that's the words he said, but I immediately interpret what he really means is, Donald, you've got 5 older sisters and an older brother. This is a wonderful, perfect family. You were a mistake and came along as an afterthought, and you screwed up the whole family, and we just wish you had never been born. So I would just skulk out of the house saying, nobody loves me. It's a rotten deal. And every time anybody made any remarks about anyone else, I always took it as criticism of me. If you said something nice about someone, if you said, isn't that a nice shirt that Brian is wearing? I'd look at Brian and say, well, what's the matter with my shirt? You'd say, oh, well, nothing, Don. We just thought Brian is wearing a nice shirt. And I said, well, you must have thought there's something funny about mine. You wouldn't have mentioned about his. And they say, no, he just has a real nice shirt. And I said, well, by God, if I had his money, I'd buy clothes like that, too. But you see, I wasn't born with a silver spoon in my life. I have to work for my living. And I get very defensive and uptight. And this brings me to another point. Today, sometimes people have problems with the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I really haven't had a lot of problems. But that was because I was gifted. And I was gifted in this way. I was dumb and I was broke. And the reason I say those were God-given gifts, because in 42 years I've never met anyone yet that was too dumb to get the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. However, I have met many people who are far too well educated to get this program. I've never met anyone too broke to get it, but I've met many people who had far too much money to get this program. So I was dumb and broke, and that gave me a wonderful start in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. Well, I was so broke that in 1949, a salesman came through town, and said they're having a conference in Montreal, Quebec, an AA conference, the first one. And you people should get down to go to this conference. It was the first time they'd ever had one. And so we wondered what we should do, and I asked Harry and Hal, I said, are you guys going? And they said, we might. And I said, well, can I get a ride down with you? And they said, no. But I don't think they believed I was going to make it because of my age. And they said, no, but if you get there, if you're sincere about this and you get there, we'll see you get a ride home. Now, of course, they were smart because they challenged me, my alcoholic defiance. And I thought, well, they don't want me to go. I'll show them. So I came home and said, Norma, I'm going to go to Montreal to this thing. Now, I had no car or not even a pogo stick. So, and I didn't have train fare or bus fare, so I forget, Mom, we got $10, and she went over and bought a piece of material, made me some pajama pants, and I had my T-shirt and my Air Force knapsack, and I got out on the road and I hitchhiked, and it was over 450 miles to Montreal. And I thought, I'll show them. And so I got down to Montreal, and I didn't have enough money to stay in the hotel. I stayed at the YMCA because it was only $1 a night then, so you got a bed and a shower and everything else. And I walked across the Mount Royal Hotel. And it was an enormous conference. It was even bigger than this one. There must have been 200 people there. And I'd never seen so many people in the meeting room in my life. And they all looked so well and were well dressed. And in the afternoon, some buses came up to the hotel, and they took us all up to the top of Mount Royal in Montreal to the conservatory up there, where the mayor and the city council were hosting the first conference of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I was standing in a corner, very shy and taking all this in, and this big tall fella came over, a big 6-footer, and came over and stuck out his hand and said, my name is Bill, what's yours? And so I told him. He said, how old are you? And I told him, and we were talking, and then he excused himself. He said, I'll see you a little later, I have to go up to front. And so he moved up, and they started announcing the afternoon festivities, and the mayor spoke and some of the council members, and then they introduced the co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, and it was Bill W. that I had been speaking to, and I didn't know that because back then Bill wasn't famous. He was just another drunk, you know, and wasn't very well known and so on, and so I was very fortunate as years went by to get to know him much better. As time went by, things began I understood a little bit more each time. I have to keep things very simple, and I discovered that when I got to Alcoholics Anonymous, I had another condition that was very, very similar to my alcoholism. And this is a condition known as BO, body odor. And now, the reason I say that my alcoholism and body odor were almost identical, the reason I say that is because if you've got body odor, you're the last person in town to find out that you have it. Everybody knows it but you. That's the way it was with my drinking and my alcoholism. When I first came to AA, I didn't think anybody knew. It wasn't until I'd been sober 6 months, everybody said, are you still in the wagon? You're doing great. Keep it up. I couldn't understand how they knew that. I didn't think they even knew I drank. So I have to keep in mind my alcoholism is like body odor. Now, the other thing is, if you have body odor and you have a gathering, you're only comfortable with other people like yourself. And you'll notice if we decided to stay in this room and have a coffee afterwards and turn the heat well up, and we're just sort of having a little social time, there's 3 or 4 in this room with BO, I'll guarantee they'll all be gathered in one corner of the room away from the rest of the group. And the reason they do that is when they're by themselves, they notice a strange odor. So they'll drift around till they can find somebody who smells a little worse, and then they relax, you see, and they sit and they talk, and so, and if anybody says there's a smell around here, they say, yeah, you know, it's them. And you'll notice any drinking party you go to, any drinking party at all, you'll always find a little group clustered together away from the rest of the group, and they're the alcoholics. And they're feeling sorry for the rest of those people out there. And they're usually close to the source of supply, you know, in the kitchen, right close to where the drinks are kept, and so on. Now, that's just like body odor, too. Now, another thing is, like body odor, is I, as an alcoholic, I resented any reference to it by my family or friends. If somebody came up to me and said, Don, you've got BO, I wouldn't say, oh, gee, thanks very much, I think I'll go and have a bath. I would get very defensive and uptight and say, you should talk. And they'd say, what do you mean? I say, well, you've never had to work a day in your life, but we people who have to work once in a while and work up a little sweat, you don't know what it is, and blah, 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 blah. Got very defensive about it and uptight, and I didn't want anything to do with them. And it's the same thing with my drinking. When anybody said to me, I saw you Saturday night, you really had tied one on, I said, I did no such thing. I had a couple of beers, and that was all. And I got very defensive and uptight. Now, the other thing, and if there's a newcomer in this meeting tonight, that there's one thing you get out of this whole meeting, it's just one thing. And that is, like the medical science, as great as it is today, has not come up with a cure. There's no known cure in the world today for either body odor or for alcoholism. However, there is successful treatment for both conditions. Now, if it's body odor is the problem, all it requires successful treatment is regular, consistent bathing with soap and water. And providing you do that, you won't have to worry about BO. But it must be done on a regular, consistent basis. Like I can't have 4 or 5 showers in one day and decide to go out and live in my car for 2 weeks to save money on hotel rooms. Anybody says that's stupid. Yet we have members of Alcoholics Anonymous who think they can go to 2 or 3 meetings in 2 or 3 days and then stay away for 3 or 4 or 5 weeks because it just doesn't work. And so, as I say, medical science has not come up with a cure. There isn't any cure in the world today for body odor or for alcoholism. Now, when I have friends come to me and they say, Don, are you still going to this meeting? And I said, yes. And I average about 4 a week, by the way, which is the same as when I first came. And people say, but why do you still go to those meetings? You haven't had a drink for 42 years. Well, what they're really saying to me is, Don, are you still bathing regularly every day? And I say, yes, I am. And they say, but you haven't smelled bad for 42 years. Why are you bathing? Now, I'm no genius, and I figured that when I was all by myself. The reason I don't smell bad is because I bathe on a regular, consistent basis. Now, all that does, of course, is looks after the physical part of my illness. The other 2 parts, the alcoholic part, are my emotional and spiritual BO. And that's what we have meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous for, to keep us clean emotionally and spiritually. Now, what do I mean by emotionally? Well, if there's newcomers in the room, what we tell them, and the brand new members, we say, well, an alcoholic has a physical sensitivity to alcohol, and we're emotionally handicapped, or we're emotionally immature. Because alcoholics can accept those words, newcomers. But really what it means is we are retarded emotionally. But the alcoholics don't like that word retarded being used in them. It's all right to have a family member who's retarded, or a cousin, or a next-door neighbor, but by God, don't call me retarded. And so what we do is we sugarcoat that pill and say we're a little emotionally handicapped, and we're a little spiritually handicapped. Really it means we are retarded emotionally and spiritually. In other words, the normal development for a human being as a child, a baby, we're very dependent. Then we reach teen years and become independent. Then we reach adulthood, and the normal progression, a normal growth, a person who reaches adulthood becomes interdependent. Alcoholics don't even understand what that word means, interdependent. They've never heard of it. And so at 18, they're still independent. They're 28, they're still independent. And 38, they're still independent. And of course, it's just like a red light flashing to everybody around them. Here's a retard, an emotional retard in our midst, Because, it's just ridiculous. We don't understand it. The other problem is because we're emotionally handicapped, we never know an alcoholic. I never knew whether I was in love or in heat. It's that simple. I never knew the difference. And I honestly didn't. And of course, this is the problem. When alcoholics enter into a relationship, I'm not saying into an interpersonal relationship, so you don't understand that, but we enter into a relationship with a member of the opposite sex. We don't do that. We take hostages. She is mine, and I want to know where she is every hour, every day, every minute. I'm jealous of her and everything else. Or vice versa. If she's alcoholic and she's very jealous of him and wants to know where he is every hour, every minute. And of course, you know, the thing that's uppermost in hostages' minds is escape. And someday this unfortunate hostage is going to escape from that alcoholic. And, you know, if they're patient enough, they'll get away from him. And so we have to understand these things, because you see, the emotional level, a straight line is a perfect emotional control. But the average person can't do that, because that's an absolute. And so about 15% of the population of North America are capable of absolutes. The 85% of us aren't. So the best example of that was Nadia Comaneci, the Romanian gymnast, as many of you know, in the Olympics, who swept all the gold medals. And when she went through her exercise, if she had slipped, she wouldn't even flicker an eyelash. And she'd walk over to the side of the room, wait till her score was posted, then strut off the stage, and then she'd hug her coach. And if it was a perfect score, there'd be a few tears, and there were tears of joy. If it wasn't a perfect score, there'd be a few tears of sorrow. So if they called her back again, she just wiped her eyes, and she went right back on and totally unemotionally went through the exercise again. The average citizen has an emotional level that goes like this. They feel good, and then they'll feel bad, then they'll feel good, maybe feel a little bad and feel good. Now, I, as an alcoholic, never had a level like that. My emotions are either over or under amplified at all times. In other words, when I was growing up, instead of feeling good, I went right up to here to sheer ecstasy. I'd turn around and I'd say, well, look at this. I'm in love immediately, and I just think this is fantastic. This is sheer ecstasy. I don't know what to do. And she says, have you met my husband? And right away I come from sheer ecstasy, not down here, depression, suicidal. And then I look at some of, here's another, right back up here, sheer ecstasy, up and down like a toilet seat at a mixed party all the time. That's the alcoholic emotional level. And we must understand that we are retarded. And so what we do in the program with Alcoholics Anonymous is learn to get rid of those highs and lows. Because you see, the thing is, if you understand emotion, that it's the most powerful force in this world today, is human emotion. Because it's human emotion that starts wars and things like that. The best way to describe an emotion by itself is fine. But with the alcoholic, we don't deal with emotion. We are involved with the emotionalism. And there's a big difference between emotion and emotionalism. For instance, it's like fire. Fire by itself, properly controlled, is a wonderful asset to us, providing it's in a furnace or a fireplace or a smelter. But under control, fire is great. Out of control, it becomes an inferno, and it's destructive to everything around it. Water is another thing. Water by itself is a wonderful asset to mankind. But when it gets out of control, as long as you've got it under control behind dams and pipes and rivers and so on, but the moment that water gets out of control and becomes a flood, it's destructive to everything in its path. The same thing with wind. It's another one of these phenomena of nature. Wind by itself, is a nice breeze, is a wonderful asset to us. It keeps the crops dry, and it keeps the mosquitoes away and the flies and everything else. A great asset. But the moment that wind gets out of control and becomes a tornado, it's totally destructive to everything it touches. And so it is with human emotion. Properly controlled and contained, it's a wonderful asset to us. But out of control, it's emotionalism, and it's totally destructive. And this is the problem with the alcoholic. We live with emotionalism. It's emotion out of control. And we have emotion and we have intellect. And we should always control our emotion with our intellect. But of course, we don't do that, and that's our problem. And this is why we come to Alcoholics Anonymous, is to learn how to deal with it. The other thing is, of course, the spiritual. And when I got to Alcoholics Anonymous, of course, one of the first things they were talking about these 12 steps. And wouldn't you believe they mentioned the word God, and of course right away I got uptight. And I said, well, you guys better understand right off the bat that I can't go for all this religion. And they said, what religion? I said, well, this God business, because I'm an agnostic. I don't believe in this. And they said, oh, we're not talking about religion. And I said, what are you talking about then? They said, well, we're talking about spirituality. And I said, what's the difference? So they told me right off the bat. But religion was an organized form of worship and belief. Spiritual is pertaining to a state of mind. And the AA program, and the two words, by the way, spiritual and religious, are not synonymous. They do not mean the same thing. You can be religious without being spiritual. You can be spiritual without being religious. Fortunately, you can also be both, but they are not synonymous. They don't mean the same thing. And so that's why in the 12th step of Alcoholics Anonymous says, having had a spiritual awakening, it simply means a change of attitude towards life and living. And we get this change of attitude by attending meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous on a regular, consistent basis. Now, we tell newcomers who come to AA that what we do is we join a group, one group. We can attend any meetings we want, as many meetings we wish in a week or in a day, but we must belong to one group, and we go to that one group that meets the same time, same place every week. And we do that on a regular, consistent basis, because the majority of us who've landed up in Alcoholics Anonymous have usually come from what they call, quote, a dysfunctional home. And the only thing that's consistent in a dysfunctional home is the inconsistency. And because we have grown up this way and are so inconsistent, we totally lack self-discipline. And so the way to get self-discipline is starting to practice consistency. So consistency leads to self-discipline. And we must do that on a regular basis. So that's what we do when we say we come to Alcoholics Anonymous. In the first step, we admit we're powerless over alcohol, that our lives have become unmanageable. When they started off with this program back in the early days, and then they got some other people to write in and ask permission to change one word. And so they changed the word from alcohol to narcotics or drugs or cocaine or eating or emotions or all sorts of things, sex and everything else. There's over 200 self-help groups today that use the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, with the exception of that one word that changed. So really the one word is the immaterial word in there. And the first step is we admit we're powerless and that our lives have become unmanageable. And the reason our lives have become unmanageable is because we do not believe in a power greater than ourselves. Now we say, oh, well, I do. I've always believed in God. No, what we mean is we went to church and we might think we believe in God, but we really don't, because we don't trust other human beings. I've never met an alcoholic yet who had complete and total trust in other human beings. I learned very early you don't trust your parents, because if you tell something to your dad, he tells your mom and she mentions it to you 2 days later, or vice versa. And boy, you just learn very early in life, don't tell anybody anything. And of course that goes on. And so I found out that why we have problems with that is we have to learn to trust. And we have to have trust of somebody, a human being, before we can have faith in a power greater than ourselves. And now the reason I say that is because I take this spoon. The spoon is tangible. We can see it, taste it, feel it, and we know it's there. And that's a tangible. An intangible is the oxygen that's in this room. We can't hear it, we can't see it, we can't smell it, we can't taste it, we can't touch it. Yet we all know there's oxygen in this room. And the reason we accept that and we have faith in the oxygen is because we trusted the scientists and the teachers who told us all about it. We trusted them completely, and I notice we're all breathing in and out. We have complete faith in the oxygen in this room. And so it is with God. We cannot believe in God, which is an intangible, unless we trust a human being. And that's why the program of Alcoholics Anonymous is built the way it is, because the second step is that we come to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. It doesn't say would, it says could. And the difference is the word could is conditional. Can if. And I say, well, can if what? Well, can, if, and you look at that step, and they say, well, go on to the third step, and you'll see right there it says, can if you do certain things. You say, well, what sort of certain things do I have to do? Well, you look at the next step. The third one is you make a decision to turn your will and your life over to the care of God as you understand it. Well, right away I had them. I was great. I was always trying to trap them. And I said, well, that won't work for me. And they said, why not? I said, because I don't understand God. I never have, and I never will. And they said, that's all right, Don, for you. We can change that slightly. There's a little bit of variation each step. So you look at that step, and your third step is to make a decision to turn your will and your life over to the care of God, whether you understand Him or not. And I said, don't be stupid. How can you do a thing like that? And they said, just do it. And I said, I just can't do that. And they said, well, of course you can. You just act as if there was a God. And I said, that's dumb. They said, no, it isn't. For you, you've acted for years as if there wasn't a God. So for an actor like you, it should be simple to act as if there was one. Now try it and see what happens. And I said, all right, we'll see, but that sounds crazy. So he said, then I thought of the next question, well, okay, now how am I going to act as if there was a God? What do I have to do to act as if there was a God? And they said, well, that's what these steps are in order for. You go to the fourth one now. Now that you're ready to act as if there was a God, you look at the fourth one, it says you make a searching and fearless moral inventory of yourself. Nobody else, just yourself. I said, well, why would I do a thing like that? Oh, that's because you can admit to God and to yourself and another human being the exact nature of your wrongs. I said, oh, but I already know the nature of my wrongs. And I'm sure as you guys say God is all-powerful, He knows too. So what's the purpose? They said the purpose is that you must trust another human being, because trust is the beginning of faith. And you have to come to trust a human being with your total story before you will ever have faith in the power of raising yourself. Trust is the beginning of faith. And so I say, well, okay, if I do this, what do I do? And they say, well, when you do this, you sit down with your sponsor and you go through this fifth step. And when that is done, then you become ready to have God remove all these defects of character. And you say, wait a minute, this God business really gets me, every other word. And they said, now don't be alarmed by it. The word God is simply G-O-D. It's an abbreviation for good, orderly direction. And this is what we lack in our lives, and to get some good, orderly direction in our lives, we call it God. And so it's very simple, don't be alarmed. So that made sense to me. So to get some good, orderly direction, I was going to do certain things. So I have to ask God to remove then these defects of character. It says, humbly ask Him. Oh, humbly. Well, humbly, I didn't know the difference between humility and humiliation. And they taught me very quickly, and I learned in AA, the definition of humility is not thinking less of me, but thinking of me less. So when they say humbly ask Him, it's just that way. Then you make a list of all persons who are harmed. And I say, well, why would you do that? Because you become willing to make amends to all. I said, all. And I said, well, I'd be willing. They said, good, now go to the next step. So you make direct amends to such people wherever possible. And so it goes through this whole step program is to get us to a point where we can believe in good, orderly direction. And we do this through the practice of a 12-step program of recovery. Now, I was one of these people who complained all the time about saying, well, you know, I still can't really go for this God bit. Because, you know, I've got a fair intelligence. And I said, you know, they read in the Bible a couple of thousand years ago where this carpenter rode around the country in a donkey. And what this guy did was he claimed his father, by the name of God, provided the power, and he made a lame man walk and he made a blind man see. And he performed that miracle for no other reason than to prove to the people of that day and age that there was a God and that he was all-powerful. Now, I said, if this God was half as smart as all these people say He is, He would know that the world is full of people today like me, who are non-believers. And we have problems believing it. Because, you know, if there was a God, he'd really perform a miracle that I could witness with my own eyes. But you know where all these miracles are performed? Have you ever noticed? You read them in the Reader's Digest. It's in France, or Spain, or Italy, or Yugoslavia. Never in the USA or Canada, where we live. It's always in some foreign country where you could never track down all the facts anyway, and you get the interpretation gets mixed up, and so, you know, there can't be any God. It's just stupid to think that. But you know, after a little while, when you stay sober for a while, strange things begin to happen. A little bit of common sense starts returning you, and you become aware of certain things around you. And when I say to people, you know, I've got a watch. Here's the Bulova Accutron, and I received this watch as a gift when I retired from the Air Force in 1964. And this watch has kept perfect time from the day I've got it. Now, this is a phenomenal piece of equipment. Now, if I said to you people, the piece of this watch just flew together overnight and there it was, you'd say that's utterly ridiculous. You'd say a watchmaker made that watch. And if I told you it was a watchmaker, you'd all believe it. Does anybody here doubt that there's a watchmaker? Have any of you ever met a watchmaker? I haven't. Have you met? Oh, there's one who's met one. But I just take your word for it. I take the jeweler's word or somebody else's word that there is a watchmaker somewhere, because this thing keeps perfect time, and I've never met anyone yet who knows how to make a watch. So it takes a very skilled craftsman, and there's evidence of his being on my wrist. Now all I got to do is take one look a little bit further beyond my own wrist, beyond the end of my nose, and look around at the world I live in. And there's miracles every day in every way. There's all sorts of things that are happening. And you think of some of them. One of the things I was reading about was the president of the New York Academy of Sciences, and he was a geneticist. And he was talking about why it is that men of science believe in God. And he said that the source of all human behavior in this world stems from our genes. These genes are so small and they're so tiny that if you took all the genes from all the people in the world today, they would only fill a thimble. Now just think of that, the impact of that. They would only fill a thimble. I mean, I couldn't believe if you said all the genes would fill a cup. That's still impossible to me, or even this room. But they say that is so. And when something is actually true that seems absolutely impossible or unbelievable, impossible to explain, but it is actuality, it's a fact, then that has to be a miracle. And so that's one of the miracles that I'm aware of today. And then I learned another thing. If we all held up our hands in this room, generally we all look alike. Yet we all know there's no two sets of fingerprints in this room the same. And so that means each and every one of us is a unique individual. And then we go one step further, and the latest census says there's 250 million Americans in this country today. And there's no two sets of fingerprints the same. Now those of you who can swallow that, you're ready for the next one. That's 5.2 billion human souls on the face of this earth today, and there are no two sets of fingerprints the same. Now how can anybody explain that? And remember, there are 10 fingerprints per person. And so you multiply that 5.2 billion, and you have over 50 billion sets of fingerprints without duplication. They also tell us, as scientists, that there's no two snowflakes alike. Now, if you lived in southern Florida or southern California, I can imagine accepting that was no problem. But you live up here, it's awful hard to believe there's no two snowflakes the same. But apparently there aren't. And so you see, this is another one of these miracles. And there's so many of them. And up here, of course, we have the ducks and the geese, and we see them flying back and forth in the fall and the spring. And the strange thing about it, the geese. The geese is a very heavy bird, one of the heaviest birds that flies. And so you'll notice when the geese are flying, they always fly in a V formation. And you wonder why that is. And the reason for that is our aeronautical engineers have explained why. And what happens is the lead goose flaps his wings and burbles the air, disturbs the air. And the other geese flying in the disturbed air takes 25% less energy to remain airborne in burbled air than it does in smooth air. And you'll notice on the large jets today they have little fingers stick up on the leading edge of the wings, and that is just to disturb the air. They call them spoilers. They disturb the air to burble it and give it greater lift to the wings. And so that's now, and every so often that lead goose will get tired and will fall back, and another one will take its place. And they fly way up north and way down south every year, back and forth, and those geese are able to do that. My question is, who taught those geese? Because they were doing that long before the Wright brothers fooled around with an airplane. So how come these geese know that? Now that has to be a miracle. And then you think of all that. There's so many, it's unbelievable. The swallows in Capistrano in California. They used to say they leave at a certain date and they return a certain date. And people say, where do they go? And somebody says, they must go down to South America. They say, don't be ridiculous. Those birds can't fly that far across that water because they would get tired. That's a small bird, the swallow. Their wings would get tired and they would fall into the ocean and drown. It was only a few short years ago that some ornithologists were on the southern coast of California when the swallows came down from Capistrano. And as they sat there watching, I noticed a strange thing. All these birds landed on the shore and started walking around on the shore until each and every one of them found a little twig. And they picked this little twig up in the feet and then took off and they headed south across the ocean. And when they got tired, they'd come down close to the water, drop the little stick and land on it and bob up and down until they had a rest. Then they close their feet in the little stick and they carry on and they go back, down there and back. And the birds, the swallows from Capistrano, California, fly down to Buenos Aires in Argentina every year and turn around and come back again in the fall. And the way they cross the ocean is carrying that little stick. Now, who taught those birds to do a thing like that? You know, this to me is amazing, this balance of nature. And there is a balance of nature. And the only person that screws it up is man. Now, just 2 years ago, the largest exporter in the world of frogs' legs, the largest in the world, was Bangladesh. And Bangladesh grew all the frogs that went to all these restaurants worldwide. But as man started cutting down the rainforest, they started getting flooding in Bangladesh. And with the floods came the flies. And with the flies came disease, because the only control of the flies were frogs. And so a year ago, the government of Bangladesh had to declare it an offense, a criminal offense, to destroy a frog, and they had to stop all frog legs being exported. And it's an offense to kill a frog in Bangladesh right now. But that is because they cannot afford to disturb the balance of nature. Well, you know, this is uncanny how all these things happen. And of course, my favorite one of all, the greatest miracle, is the one where you take the little tiny brown seed and plant it in black soil. And you give it a little moisture and a little bit of light, and the next thing you know, you get a dark green plant, a beautiful green plant. And when you pull that plant out of the ground, it has a bright red root. And you say, how can you get a bright red root on a dark green plant out of black soil from a tiny brown seed? And you take your knife and you cut the root in half, and it has a pure white heart. And that to me is amazing. A pure white heart in a bright red root from a dark green plant out of black soil from a tiny brown seed. And so every day today when I eat my salad and I look at my radish, and I love radishes, that tells me God is alive and well. As long as they're radishes, there's miracles. And of course, when I think of that and God is alive, we've got some funny people. I know the Canadians don't believe this, but we've got some funny people living in the United States. They think God is dead and Elvis is alive. And you know, no way. It's the other way around. Elvis is dead and God is very much alive. And as long as we have the swallows going to Buenos Aires and the geese flying back and forth and the radishes growing and all these things, God is alive and well looking after us. And we just have to go along with it and do some of the things that he suggests. There's many other things too. I used to be the one that used to always be critical of religion. I'd say, well, if this religion's any good, why do they have so many? And, this one practices this one does that. There's such big differences. And then one day I stopped to think, and I was told, why don't you look and see if any of these religions have anything in common? You've always looked at the differences, which is typically alcoholic, the chronic fault finder. Look for something good. Is there anything they have in common? And when you start doing that, start looking at some of these great religions and seeing some of the things they have in common, it's absolutely remarkable. Because many of the great religions believe that all forms of life on this earth, all forms of life function either by instinct or by climate, save one. And the one form of life that's different is human life. And that simply means that we are different because we were given a free will. No other form of life on earth was given a free will. Now, what does that free will mean? It simply means that whatever I will, the power is added. And you notice that all of our meetings of AA, everywhere I've been all around the country, and I've been very fortunate to travel around the world, and they always close the meeting, at the end of the meeting, with "Our Father who art in heaven." And so when we say heaven, we're talking about some space out there, infinity, that we goes above and beyond, that we keep on finding goes further and further beyond what we've ever believed in before. And we say "Our Father." Why do we call this good, orderly direction our Father? Well, just look at what is a good father. A good father is not mean or malicious, and he's not punishing, and he's not vengeful or spiteful. A good father is warm and loving and kind. He also has a sense of humor. God, if he has any kids, and especially alcoholics, he's really got to have a sense of humor. But a good father should have a sense of humor. And then I started to wonder, how could this God have a sense of humor? Until I understood about this will business, this free will. And I said, that's it. That's where sense of humor comes in. Because, see, I often hear people get up in May and say, "Oh, I had a wonderful day today. God rewarded me today." Or else they say, "Oh, I did a terrible thing. Oh, God punished me today." And I don't believe God rewards or punishes me on a daily basis. This is where sense of humor came in. When I was created, he said, "Look, Buster, I am really a busy guy. There's over 5 billion of you running loose down there, and I haven't got time to go and reward and punish you on a daily basis. So what I'll do to make things easier for all of us, I will give you the power to reward or punish yourself. I'll provide the power, but you must exercise the will. And so whatever I will, the power is added. And so if I will it to be lonesome and worried and anxious and fearful and depressed and suicidal, the power is there and I'll become suicidal. But if I decide and will it to be happy, joyous, and free, the power is there to make me happy, joyous, and free. When I discovered that, I have not had a depression or felt really bad or down for years. I can't tell you the last time I ever had depression. My wife will vouch for it right here. I had open heart surgery 6 years ago. The cardiologist, a few months after the operation, says to me, "By the way, we want to tell you, after this type of operation, a great many of our patients tend to be depressed. And so if this happens, let us know, because we have some medication that will help you." So, of course, Norma just laughed, and we wondered, "What's the matter?" She says, "He doesn't believe in depression." And of course, we didn't want to get into it with the cardiologist. Said, "Oh, don't worry about that, Doc. I'll let you know if I get depressed." But, of course, I don't get depressed. The best way to describe it is, you can all see this light there, I guess. Now, there's power to this light for light or darkness. Now, the power didn't suddenly fail in this room. Idiot here took action. I willed it. I turned the switch. I cut it off. Now, we can all get on our knees and pray till we're blue in the face for this light to come on, and I'll guarantee it won't come on until somebody gets off their butt and takes action. And I just go like that. Oh, there it is. Isn't this nice? Happy, joyous, and free. Oh, I'd like to be miserable. Oh, yeah. No, I want to be happy. It's that simple. There is power to this light for light or dark. But I must take the action. And so it is in my life, feeling happy, joyous, and free, or feeling miserable and uptight. Those are the things that I have to do to take the action to be happy, joyous, and free. And it works every time, I can guarantee it. And all we have to do, and this big thing of all, of course, is this change of attitude. All our lives we have been the chronic fault finders. Start to look for something different and something good. There's good and bad in every situation and in every human being. In fact, that's one of the signs of emotional growth and stability and maturity. The Los Angeles school system have it as one of their definitions, that the person that is mature recognizes and understands that there's good and bad in everybody and everything. People aren't all bad or all good, or situations aren't all bad or all good. There's good and bad in everything. That's a sign of maturity when we recognize that. And then there's so many things about a change of attitude. And people say, well, how do you change your attitude? It's very easy. I think of the story of the woman in New York who was suffering. She thought she was just getting tired, and she wanted to get away from the husband and the kids and the dog, and she thought she'd like a trip to Florida. So she went to see her psychiatrist, and she said, well, you know, things are getting me down, and I just don't know what's going on, doctor, and this, that, and the other thing. And she said, I really think I need a rest. Don't you think I should go on a vacation somewhere? And he says, well, I want to tell you about another woman that's suffering from the same way you did. And this is the story of the woman who one day checked into a very fashionable hotel in Boston. And when she got to the hotel room, the bellhop took her up, and she got into her room, and she started to unpack her clothes. Then she became aware that there was a piano playing in the next room. And she listened for a little while, and she said, I wonder how long that's going to go on. And she kept on unpacking, the piano kept on playing, and then she got a little upset and a little annoyed, and she thought, I'm here for rest, and this is ridiculous, some idiot hammering on a piano in the next room. So she reached the phone, she called and asked to speak to the manager. The manager came on the line, and she told him who she was, and told her what room she was in, and said, there's some idiot in the next room hammering on a piano. And she said, you better stop him. And he said, I'm sorry, I can't. She said, well, you'd better, because I'm here in Boston for a rest. I've been ordered to come here for rest, and if that idiot keeps hammering on that piano, and I suffer a nervous breakdown and wind up in hospital in Boston, I'm going to hold this hotel responsible for my hospital bill. And she says, so you've got to stop him hammering on that piano. And he said, I'm sorry, madam, we just can't stop him. And she says, why can't you stop him? He says, because it's the great Paderewski, and he's practicing his concert in Symphony Hall tonight. She says, why didn't you say so in the first place? And she hung up. And then she got busy, and she started calling all her friends. About an hour or so later, the other thing, the manager said, she had asked to have a room changed, and he said, I couldn't do that either because the hotel was filled. And so an hour or so later, they got a cancellation, and the manager, remembering this woman next door to Paderewski, called the bell captain over and said, we better get up and change that woman's room right away before she does have a nervous breakdown and take us to court. So they went up, and they listened at the door, and it was all quiet. They assumed she had gone out, so the bell captain used his pass key, and they said, we'll go in and move her things and let her know when she comes back in. And they opened the door, and they looked into the room, and here was this woman and all her friends sitting around the room listening in rapt attention to the great master play. Now, the only thing that happened was a change of attitude, and it's that simple in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'm the one who used to ask for miracles, and if there was a miracle that I could witness with my own eyes, then I too could believe in a power greater than myself. And I said, but no miracles. And I guess I was a real holdout, and so finally it happened right at home. Because just prior to my joining Alcoholics Anonymous, my father died. And the one time a mother needs her sons is a time like that, and those 5 sisters need their 2 brothers. And I was down east, he was out west. We got into the city where they were living at the funeral, and he and I met, and right away we started drinking. And of course we were an embarrassment to our mother, and we're an embarrassment to our sisters, and we're of no help in that funeral. And so you see, I was a failure as a son and a failure as a brother. And when I looked at the home I was in, by the time I got to Alcoholics Anonymous, it really wasn't a home, it was a house. A house is a building. A home is where there's warmth and love and communication. And ours was not a home, it was a house. I had a wife, but she certainly didn't have a husband. I had 2 children, but they didn't have a father. The business I was in was on the verge of bankruptcy. And this was the condition I was in when I landed in the doorstep of Alcoholics Anonymous. And those fellows, all they did that first night, and it took them quite some time, they said something to the effect that, come walk with us one day at a time, and you'll begin to feel clean inside, and good things will happen in your life. And that's all I did, was went walking with them one day at a time. And they said, be of help to others, work with newcomers, and attend a meeting regularly, and things will happen in your life beyond your wildest dreams. And when Nathan read those promises, I thought, boy, this is ridiculous, because those promises have been fulfilled in my life completely a long, long time ago, way above and beyond the promises in the book. And the greatest miracle of all is time went by and I stayed sober, and I stayed active in Alcoholics Anonymous. I noticed the most remarkable thing occurred in my life. I saw the program of Alcoholics Anonymous turn a house into a home. I saw this program give a woman a husband, and it gave 2 children a father. It made the business from the verge of bankruptcy to be a very profitable business as time went by. The other thing it did, it gave back another woman, not 1 son, but 2 sons. Because you see, shortly after I got into Alcoholics Anonymous, I went home because all the family were gathered there. And I got in and I announced to the family, I said, well, I've quit drinking. And everybody said, oh, Donald, that's wonderful. And one of my sisters said, how did you do it? And very proudly I said, I joined Alcoholics Anonymous. And they said, how could you do that to the family? And I said, do what? They said, that's admitting we have an alcoholic in the family. I said, this family is loaded with alcoholics. Of course, that's not the way to win friends and influence people, by calling them all a bunch of alcoholics. And boy, they were shocked. They said, you can join any crackpot organ. And I said, besides the old man and Pat, my brother Pat, I said, that's all that's the matter with those 2, is they were just alcoholics. And of course, they were horrified. They said, you join any crackpot outfit you like, but leave your brother out of this, and so on and so forth. And they gradually all left, save 2, my mother and my sister-in-law. They waited till everybody was gone. They said, Donald, tell us more about this alcoholics thing, whatever it is you joined. So I told them all about it, and they were thrilled. And so my sister-in-law said, how do we get him to join? And of course, I was new, and you go from where you're anti-AA and everything else, and 5 minutes after you're sober, you get the Messiah complex. You want to run around, and save the world. I said, and he lived on the West Coast. I said, oh, that's easy. Send them down to Cobalt in Northern Ontario, where I live. And I said, those guys will get him sober. And she said, all right. And so she went back, and she gave him some yarn about saving money out of, and she went to household finance and borrowed some money, is what she did. But she gave him some yarn about saving some money out of her household allowance each month. How she could save it, because he never gave her much, but and talked him into going down, taking a week off work, and going down to see his niece and nephew, whom he had never seen. And she gave him a real pitch on this, that he ought to do this. And he finally gave in, I guess, and so down he came. So whenever he arrived, I started telling him about AA, of course, and he just nodded and said, yeah, I'm glad to hear you've joined it. You never could hold your booze. You're not like the old man or me. And I thought, this is awful. So he wasn't interested, of course, so we started pouring drinks for him. I had a fellow who worked for me that was a non-alcoholic, so I gave him some money, and I said, take him over to the Legion and keep him there all day and pour booze into him. We used to play awful tricks in the early days of AA. So he kept pouring booze into him all day, and he got so drunk at night he'd just get into bed and pass out. And then in the morning, Norma would bring him a cold bottle of beer in bed. She'd take the lid off and hand it to him and say, "Here, Pat, just to make you feel better." And he'd take this beer and drink down, and he'd say, "God," he said, "do you know how lucky you are, Donald? Mary would never do a thing like that. How you got a wife like that was so understanding." I said, "Well, that's Norma, you know." And so she did this each morning, and we kept him drunk for 4 days straight until he finally made that fatal mistake. He said, "You know, it's too bad I have to leave tomorrow." And I said, "Why?" He said, "I'd be tempted to go to one of those meetings with you if I didn't have to leave." I said, "Don't worry, there's one tonight." Well, you see, in those days, meeting night was any time you had a hot prospect. It didn't matter who he was. And so I ran down the back stairs, and Norma kept talking to him, got on the phone, called Harry and Hal. The guy said, "Tonight he's ready," because we've been working this on how to keep him drunk to get this guy. Well, you have to make him vulnerable, you know. It's acceptable to. And miracle of miracles. We had one of those all-night sessions about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. He got on the train and went all the way back to the West Coast and called the number we had given him, and he had 16 years of blessed sobriety before he died of natural causes. So you see, I had witnessed this program give back a woman, not one son, but 2 sons, and gave those 5 sisters 2 brothers back. And so this has to be a miracle. And then the other thing is, I was one who used to complain about higher power and God never paying any attention. Because I used to pray and pray and nothing ever happened. You know, all the things I prayed for never worked. And so if your prayers are never answered, how can there be any God? Of course, what I didn't understand is I asked for things that I wanted, and I was given the things that I needed. And that was the difference. It took me a long time to understand that. I had a number of years of sobriety in Alcoholics Anonymous, when one day I happened to read something written over 100 years ago by an anonymous soldier of the Confederacy. And this is another one of these miracles. I read this thing, and I took it into my wife in the kitchen. I said, "I can't believe that some guy over 100 years ago has written the story of my life," because he was talking about the higher power and about prayer and the ways of this higher power, the way this higher power works in our lives. And it's called The Ways of the Lord. And it goes something like this: "I asked God for strength that I might achieve, but I was made weak, that I might learn humbly to obey. I asked for health that I might do greater things. I was given infirmity that I might do better things. I asked for riches that I might be happy. I was given poverty that I might be wise. I asked for all things that I might enjoy life. Instead, I was given life that I might enjoy all things. I got nothing that I asked for, but everything I had hoped for. So despite myself, my prayers were answered, and I feel I am among all men most richly blessed." And there's some of you tonight who say, "Well, that's all right for that old boy up there, but how can this program work for me?" And I've got it written right down here, a quote from page 164 of our big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And it's very simply, it states on page 164, all you have to do to have this miracle unfold in your life. And it goes like this, quote, "Abandon yourself to God as you understand God. Admit your faults to Him and to your fellows. Clear away the wreckage of your past and give freely of what you find and join us. We shall be with you in the fellowship of the Spirit, and you will surely meet some of us as you trudge the road of happy destiny. May God bless you and keep you until then." Thank you.